Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Brexit was always going to be more challenging for some parts of the country than for others, perhaps nowhere more so than Dover, Britain's gateway to Europe. But now Sky News has obtained a Dover Council internal impact study which reveals the sheer extent of the difficulties. The report is damning about the government's Brexit strategy and outlines drastic implications for large parts of Kent. It also questions whether central government fully understands the challenges. With the latest of our Brexit Forensics series, our political editor Faisal Islam has this exclusive report.
It is the gateway to and from the continent. 1/6 of UK trade comes through the port of Dover. 100 miles of lorries by length every single day, rolling off and rolling on the ferries on the Short Straits crossing and straight on to the UK high-speed road network. Left for the A2, right for the A20, and being in the same single market and customs union means that the customs facility in the middle is tiny. Just 3 lorries from an entire ferry checked. But an internal Brexit impact report obtained by Sky News from Dover District Council, the health authority here, suggests that this free flow can't last.
It's one thing that there appears to be very little changing here at Dover Port. It's another to obtain this internal report that shows a council, a port health authority, with its head in its hands over central government foot dragging over the Brexit negotiations and key decisions. Indeed, if you look at the detail of this report, it shows pretty clearly that at this key artery of UK-European trade, there appears to be no chance of making the changes necessary for a no-deal Brexit in just 8 months' time.
There's been a lot of focus on customs checks or not, but it's the necessary changes to food safety checks that are a particular concern. The document questions whether it is fully understood by government that the Port's Health Authority will not have powers to physically stop vehicles, in the large are blind as to what is entering the port, and that the layout of the port means there is nothing to stop vehicles leaving, and that there are inadequate facilities to inspect and store food, and no facilities to park vehicles waiting for examination. The report questions exactly whether such checks will have to take place in England or in France. Current systems are based on juxtaposed controls being conducted in France and England. Once outside the EU, such controls may cease. Earlier this year, Sky News revealed that the government had signed gagging clauses with some companies, indicating that such checks will simply not be applied coming into the UK in a no-deal situation. But it's the other side of the channel that's the biggest problem, according to local companies here.
The EU could decide, actually, here's the rule book, and this applies to you. It could be that, every vehicle going into Europe is going to have checks.
And that's the queue on the M20 and the A2 is into Europe.
Yeah, that's
so
coming
even
through.
if they say we're not going to check anything, that's about the queue in Calais.
Yeah, that's coming in.
That's coming in. So
yeah.
The queue here is about whether or not Europe enforces its own laws, which it says it will do.
Yeah. If it enforces its laws, then actually lorries will have to be checked.
And checks mean not just queues, but entire sections of the M20 motorway in Kent, newly repurposed.
Imagine this, the government plan is to turn all of that stretch of motorway going to the coast, all the lanes, into a giant 13-mile lorry park for thousands of lorries. And on this side of the motorway, a kind of mini motorway contraflow system to cope with normal traffic. And the local businesses that have been consulted say it will take days or weeks to set this system up rather than hours for the current traffic mitigation measures, and there can only really be one use for that.
At the Highways England consultation in Canterbury on turning Britain's main road link to the continent into a lorry park, it is a case of don't mention Brexit.
But there are also times of extraordinary traffic congestion caused by periods of cross-channel disruption.
But borders are mentioned, and Operation Brock is being primed as an interim solution for use in the weeks ahead of Brexit Day from March 2019. But for how long? The Dover Council document suggests not a few weeks or months, but years. The report says that the permanent solution will not be in place for many years. Therefore, the temporary traffic management system, Operation Brock, will be in force for some time.
Both of those things can't be true. It can't be successful, and we need this huge 13-mile traffic kind of pile-up and disaster that they're supposedly planning for. So which is it? And I've got alarm bells ringing, and I'm sure the Port of Dover and all the small businesses along that route have as well.
This is a direct sale to Sweden. The finished transmission is sent to Turkey. More engine components. The customer for that is in Holland.
This family-run manufacturer in Kent sees free-flowing, frictionless European trade at risk.
If we do end up with border checks, we know from experience 3 years ago how a relatively minor problem absolutely jammed up the roads around Ashford and around Kent. So I am extremely worried that we might find that the road network just becomes paralysed and we can't get goods in, we can't get goods out. I'm begging the government to make a decision and make it quick. In business, making no decision paralyses a business. In politics, it seems to keep you in power.
The Garden of England has always been the gateway to Europe too. Here, they're now having to plan for what happens should that gate be wedged shut. Faisal Islam, Sky News.
Well, we should say we did ask to speak to the MP for Dover, Charlie Elphick, who was elected as a Conservative, but he was unable to speak to us. However, Faisal Islam is. So let's be clear about this. This is a report from a council controlled by which party?
It's Conservative Council, Dover District Council, here it is. Lots of other stuff in here. In this Brexit impact report, but we obviously focused...
It's a private report, or...?
No, it's an internal Dover District Council report. And what's interesting about Dover District Council, it's not just a local authority, it is also the Port Health Authority with important legal powers in the port like Dover and also actually over the Channel Tunnel too. If, as seems entirely plausible, the UK becomes a different regulatory zone and you need to have checks. Now, I think, let's take a step back a minute, the government... Well, one part of government would argue this is precisely why they had the Chequers Agreement. This is precisely why they have the facilitated customs arrangement, precisely why they want to stay part of a common free trade area for goods and agri-food. Because if they get that to fly with Europe, which is a massive if, they won't need those checks and maybe these contingencies won't be required.
So we'll just carry on as now.
But at the same time, they're saying, well, by the way, we have to prepare for no deal. I think the importance of this document is firstly that contingency plan may not be ready. That's the first thing, and Dover Council's pretty clear on that. That if it is activated, it's not just a matter of a few weeks. It could be there for years because there's no permanent solution to all of this. I think there's quite an interesting strategic issue here because when Operation Brock was first announced by government in a written ministerial answer in May, we were told that this had nothing to do with Brexit, that it was about a replacement for Operation Stack. So that's what I went to go and investigate. And it's pretty clear that it has quite a lot to do with Brexit, I'd say at the very least, that it's meant for enactment by March 2019. And then local businesses told me something very clear, that this, because it's a contraflow on the northbound system, would take a couple of weeks to activate, not a few minutes or a few hours as Operation Stack. This really matters. So the only plausible use for it is to be pre-activated preemptively in March ahead of a potential no-deal Brexit. And this is quite amusing. Project Brock, as it's revealed by another document we've got hold of, which is Kent County Council's document, stands for Brexit Operations for Kent. So this is undoubtedly about preparations for Brexit. So what we have now is the M20, our main link to continental Europe, right now being the hard shoulder being hardened to accommodate a parking lot for lorries, essentially because of the prospect or the possibility of no deal Brexit.
I have to say we did put this to the Transport Secretary, Chris Grayling, last week on All Out Politics, and he just said, look, it's going to be fine. They'll be parked down the sides of the road, but the motorway will continue down the middle.
So I can only go I mean, this is the thing, isn't it? People will argue this is just Project Fear. These are documents from councils, Conservative councils, explaining what their view of what the impact of this.
If lorries were
Kent
parked
County
down the side on this reinforced
We've just got
shoulder.
this document from Kent County Council. It says massive disruption to local traffic. I mean, actually, in the Dover County Council document, they talk of how you'd have to divert ferry traffic from Dover. Some people are arguing about reopening Ramsgate Port. You have the situation where they're worried that local traffic might have to go back to, I think it's Maidstone, to rejoin a queue if they can't identify themselves as local traffic. So I think what's important to go back to that thing about whether this is about Brexit or not was that they really tried to downplay the idea that this had anything to do with Brexit. And I think the reason is because they're very sensitive about the notion that this change is to do with the fact that they're leaving the customs union and single market.
When we get the government's papers on what no-deal Brexit would mean, this will be covered in it.
Well, we just don't know. This is precisely what businesses need to know right now, because they need to start to plan their supply chains. And so they're worried. But when something that's so obviously a Brexit contingency plan, they can't even admit that it is a Brexit contingency plan. You do just wonder where this is all going. And there's a fundamental strategic issue here. On the one hand, they need some of these realities as they see them to get out, because they want to make this case for Chequers. On the other hand, they need to say, but no deal will be fine. I mean, it's quite difficult to sustain those two different states of the world in the same analysis, but that's what we've got at the moment. And the publication of these no-deal documents, if we get them, when we get them, will be quite a moment.
Faisal, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's put this now to Richard Burnett, who is the Chief Executive of the Road Haulage Association. Welcome to you.
Morning.
Indeed, simple question from the point of view of road haulage. Are we ready for what's going to happen? Don't know what it is, but what's going to happen on the 29th of March?
From where I sit at this point in time, we're not ready. And that's not scaremongering, it's the reality of the situation. And I think the politicians need to understand the harsh reality of what may happen. Two major issues, I think, from our perspective. One is obviously the customs process. And the second issue, which I'll go on to talk about, is the permit issue. The customs issue, Chris Grayling has very clearly said, openly in the press, that there will be no border checks. It would be utterly ridiculous to think that that was possible. Just the sheer scale and the number of vehicles that are coming through Dover would make it impractical. So he's kind of almost said that in a no-deal situation, well, we wouldn't check anything. We'll have to work out a process, but we wouldn't check anything to keep everything moving. But the French have not made any commitment in terms of the juxtaposed position and whether or not they would put those customs processes in place, and we think that they probably would, certainly in a no-deal where we come out of the customs union. And therefore, we're going to see queues on the M20
going the other way,
the other way, probably on a scale like you've never seen before. And it will make probably 2 years ago when we faced the migrant crisis and the issues then look like we're stopping at traffic lights. So I think we're going to be seeing delays of probably days, weeks, not just hours, days. I think we're looking at that kind of scale.
And how big a lorry park would that create?
We're talking about thousands and thousands of trucks, thousands. So that's one issue. The other thing that spins off from that is that there are European hauliers that are already walking away from business, because I guess contractual arrangements mean that they need to tie up European hauliers to come into the UK. They're already walking away from work, saying we don't want to do it. So we've got British hauliers that are being approached by European businesses wanting them to cover work next year.
That's good, isn't it?
Well, you'd say it was good, but this is the big issue, which is the issue of permits. So a bill went through Parliament as a contingency over the last month or so to apply permits. Now, British hauliers, have to have what's called an international standard international licence, and they have to have a community licence, which means we have access to Europe.
So you're saying they wouldn't be able to drive on European roads?
Correct. Yeah. So our withdrawal means that we withdraw from that right, and there are no negotiations that have been undertaken with the EU yet in terms of access, and therefore the only way that we can actually access the EU is by using permits. And there are two types: multilateral and bilateral. And clearly we'd need to negotiate those permits bilaterally, but in terms of ECMT, we've already got a quoted allocation, which is 1,224. So we will run out of permits in probably half a day. and we will have no way of getting to Europe. So that's going to put British hauliers out of business literally overnight. If we get to a no-deal situation, we cannot afford to get to a situation where we have no deal.
All right, so given that the government is where it stands, would the Chequers deal get round this?
It would. It would. But I think if you listen to the Europeans, they're saying, well, you want your cake and eat it. You know,
which is a single market for services.
Absolutely. So
and for goods.
And my sense...
For goods, sorry, not services.
Yeah, my sense, talking to, you know, government civil servants, is that you know, we're going to go to the wire on this. If we do get a deal, it's going to be right to the wire. But for business that's got to plan, you know, we need some hard talking. We need to understand what's the reality of the situation. And it doesn't just affect food. You know, if you think about other transport operations that go to Europe, the music industry, concert tours, F1, you know, if you're looking at the motor racing industry, they will not be able to access Europe because they won't have trucks that will be allowed.
Is the transition period, would that get round it? Because it would postpone it for another couple of years, is that right?
If we get into a transition period, I mean, everybody keeps talking about the fact we've got a transition period agreed in principle, but none of this is agreed until it's agreed. And I think that the reality is, you know, we're impartial, but we need to flag and highlight where the risks are, and this, at this point in time, is a real risk.
So what is your to-do list for the government now?
Well, we need to try and push the message that we've got to get to a deal. We have to get to a deal in order to resolve this. There is no plan B. You know, there literally is no plan B. So for those 8,000, 9,000 hauliers that go to Europe every day, if we can't get permits and we can't get access, they literally will stop overnight.
And that will mean no supplies?
No supplies, people out of work, jobs gone.
Richard Bennett, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
I've been